This is the Franchise QB Podcast, where we empower entrepreneurs to win big in franchising. We huddle up weekly to educate our audience about the most successful small business model ever created, franchising.
Welcome to the Franchise QB Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Halpern, a 20-year industry veteran and entrepreneur. My mission is for listeners to achieve their American dreams of creating wealth and independence through franchise ownership. Every week, we speak with franchisees, franchisors, or vendors that support the industry. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started. Joining us in the huddle today is Jordan Brigham, franchise owner at Ace Handyman Services. Welcome to the show, Jordan.
Mike, thanks for having me on the huddle.
Absolutely. Good to see you again. So You and I met almost 3 years ago, hard to believe, but back in May of 2021 during COVID. I know a lot of people don't like to talk about COVID, but it's really relevant for an important piece of history, and that's how you and I connected. So at the time, you had recently relocated from the Boston area to a second home that you and your wife had in Portland, Maine. You'd spent your whole career in IT, looking for a new stream of income. And you were also contemplating making that second home in Portland your primary residence since COVID had kind of changed the game, and you're raising a family in the city and now thinking about raising a family in Portland. So tell us the Jordan Brigham story leading up to when we met in 21.
Sure. Yeah, I'm humbled to be able to share a little bit about it. So thanks for asking and having me on. Yeah, I mean, I spent the bulk of my career in the tech space, specifically software, enterprise software, sales, building teams, customer success, sort of operational aspects of go-to-market. I guess I would sum that up very quickly. And like, I've always loved to build things. I just spent the bulk of my professional career building teams, people, and little revenue generating engines. Along the way, my passion for real estate and old properties in particular really developed and flourished. We, bought a couple unique old properties in Boston that we sort of fixed up and eventually sold. And in 2017, we started spending a lot more time up in Maine. We had an old lake cabin that was post and beam, sort of really beautiful framework, but needed some love, and we started fixing that up. And then 2019, we invested. We had an investment property in Portland's West End and Arts District. So it was an old, 1890 single family home that we purchased. So yeah, that's a little bit about the sort of the backstory. We're spending a lot of time up in Maine, 2017, 2018, 2019, and made the jump, ironically, right around when COVID was hitting. A lot of people are like, most people sort of make these sort of shifts and move, post-pandemic, they leave cities and things along those lines. We did it right around that time, actually a little bit before. And so, going into COVID, at the time I was running a consulting business remotely, working, I guess, remotely like everyone else was. And we had this old property that we had sort of moved into full time and set plans in motion, I guess, like all of us, to start fixing things up. You're spending a lot of time in your house, you're looking around, you're like, how am I going to fix this thing up?
There's a lot to do.
Interestingly enough, I think the Ace hardware business doubled between sort of 2020 into 2021, just because so many people were fixing things up. So we actually leaned into doing a really huge renovation of that property in 2020, and that sort of wrapped up into early part of 2021. And ironically, that's what sort of led me to maybe connecting with you and connecting with Ace, and would love to talk.
I think you and I definitely talked about this back in 21, but my family, the nucleus is in the Philadelphia area, and we had my late uncle, lived in Burlington, Vermont, Shelburne. So we used to go up there when we were kids, and then we started doing these reunions in 2015, 2017, and I believe in 2019, where we'd go up to Isle Labat, the Champlain Islands. I know it's not necessarily Maine, but I got to tell you, man, I get why you moved there because I live in DC now, or Northern Virginia. I've lived in suburban Philadelphia. There's something special about that part of the country. And if you're able to figure out a way to get there and make a living and build a business, like, totally makes sense. So I think I just was kind of connecting with you in that regard when you kind of told me what you were thinking. So, yep. So you mentioned to me that you moved, before pandemic hit, which is just interesting timing, because COVID made a lot of people move to lifestyle destinations because they could work remotely. You no longer had to go in the office. And franchising actually provides that opportunity to continue with, where you live, work, and play in a new community that you get to call home. Nowadays people are getting called back to go to the office. So you were in a neat position where you kind of started your business, and now you don't have to go back because you created this community-based company by partnering with franchise systems. So just to give the audience kind of an idea of what you did, you invested in a multi-territory franchise with Ace Handyman Services. A lot of people are familiar with Ace Hardware. They're annually in the top 50 franchises in Entrepreneur Magazine. And I think it resonated with me, and I think subsequently with you, that, wow, there's a powerful brand name here with Ace and the Handyman Services, with your experience in, renovating these old homes, made a whole lot of sense. So you secured an area from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, up the I-95 corridor to Portland, Maine, where you live. So what was that like taking that leap into entrepreneurship, especially, at the start of a global pandemic?
Yeah. I'll sort of, talk about the genesis of it and all that. But I think you bring up some really good points that, I'd love to double click on. And during a pandemic, we're all, fairly isolated. I think the people that moved to new areas, lifestyle destinations, Maine, was one of those places that saw, in migration. Other places, be it Idaho or Vermont, people were moving out of cities into kind of rural areas. Part of the motivation for getting into franchising or getting into a business like Ace Handyman Services, beyond, an opportunity of financial investment and one,
right,
was really to have the ability to start and run a community-minded business, right? Mm-hmm. Like, my background was spent working with colleagues and customers all over the country, all over the world. It would be very rare that, I was serving my actual community. Yeah. And so one of the things that I think was really cool, and one of the reasons we moved up to Maine, but I think the light bulb went off during that time in 2020, going into 2021, is, hey, is an opportunity to, launch a business that truly serves your neighbors, serves, and it allows you to kind of get that sort of connection. And so for those of us who maybe moved to some of these destinations, I thought it was a great opportunity to just roll up the sleeves and get more embedded in that community. So that's a bit of the kind of the context and what it was like, or the why. And I think it was really, I felt that over the years. The interesting thing about, what brought me to Ace really had to do with, like, a fence, truth be told. We were doing a major renovation. At the time, I was doing some consulting work, kind of cooped up, but was just focusing all my energy into fixing this house. And I went to, we were done with the builder, and, there was just a bunch of stuff that needed to be done. Like, the builder was, 2-3 months long on our project. He needed to get to his next build. So there's just a huge punch list of things, one of those being a fence. And I recall, like, calling around. It was October of 2020, and I called around like 10 fence companies because I wanted to redo this fence in a patio for the spring. Right. And out of the 10 calls I made, I think I got 1 or 2 callbacks. And same thing with the gutters. Like, we need to have sections of gutters fixed and redone. Called 10 gutter companies, maybe got 1 or 2 callbacks. Had, a handful of other punch list things. So the concept that, like, hit me over the head was, at that time, I was spending, 20 hours a week, I felt like I was a sales guy again. I was like cold calling people to potentially help me out and, struggling to get callbacks.
Yeah.
And, eventually I ended up putting up a posting, I think on Craigslist. I was like, look, I just want to hire a handyman. I will pay you by the day. I will pay you by the week. I want someone to work with me. You don't have to give me a quote, or don't worry about coming in to give me an estimate. I know everyone's busy. Just tell me what, I need to pay you to get you to turn up for the day, and turn up, work an honest day's work, and we'll just chip away at the list of things I had to do. And so I ended up doing that. And was successful in finding someone. But that's what sort of led me to this handyman.
Yeah, but that's a Herculean task. I mean, you found that there's this big rift in the professionalism of these home services, and the light bulb went off. Hey, if I can professionalize this and bring in a brand and bring in a process, like here's a real opportunity to, change the narrative here in terms of what you're experiencing and what it could look like. So, and the other piece I want to bring up is, I mean, I have young kids, like the idea of relocating to a new town, and I know you'd already done that process, but then starting a new business at the same time. What kind of challenges did you face, like being the new guy in town, raising a family, and trying to get this business off the ground?
I mean, time, right? Like that's really always the challenge for any, whatever we're doing. So I think a lot of people at that time had a ton of time to bake bread and get hobbies and learn things and watch Netflix. I didn't have any of that time. I was like running around trying to get a business up and running, get 3 different businesses up and running by and large. We started with one centrally. At the time, my wife was also launching a business sort of separately, and kids. So I don't even know.
What was the business that she was launching?
She launched like a yoga studio.
Oh,
like
cool.
Locally, again, kind of a small little kind of community minded, yoga studio.
Awesome.
And so, So
okay.
What was it like? It was fun, but like, it's a time commitment, and I think that's the biggest thing. Other than that, I don't really recall, like, I don't think it was overtly challenging. We were a bit fortunate up here because life was a little normalized at that point in time.
And you had the advantage
on lockdown
of knowing the area, because you already moved there. You've already spent time there. I get approached by a lot of candidates that are like, I want to move from, Nashville, Tennessee to Florida and start a business. I'm like, it's hard to do that. You might want to get familiar with the area before you really get locked in with your business. So in your case, you kind of knew you liked the area. So that was kind of a box.
I knew the area, and I had a pretty strong hypothesis about the market opportunity, right? Not only like the need that I experienced in talking with other people, but one of the things that was very interesting was that, we had our kids at this new school that we got them into in 2019, 2020, in fall of 2020, or maybe it was 2021. I looked around, and 80% of the parents, it might have been 2021, 80% of the parents, well, they had relocated. The families had relocated. So a lot of people that moved in to this area in that 2020, 2021, 2022 period. So you had this kind of, relative to the population, huge, in-migration. Maine also has the largest percentage of secondary homes in the country. And it has the oldest population in the country.
Very interesting.
Ace Handyman Services is specifically, unique in that really what's broadly shifting across the market is you have maybe the baby boomer generation that was DIY, are starting to age out or have aged out of being able to preserve, protect, repair, maintain their home. And then millennial generation or first-time home buyers, maybe they've been living in a city, they don't have tools, right? Like you've been living in New York City, you're not coming up and you buy a house and you haven't accrued all the tools. So it created, an interesting market opportunity for us. The biggest challenge was finding people and finding people to work for us, because we do hire full-time employees, part-time employees, but they're part of our family business. We don't subcontract out.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that question. That
was the biggest challenge.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's interesting you mentioned, because you've heard that a lot of people are moving out of the cities and these urban areas, and they're settling in rural areas, smaller cities, smaller towns. I've heard Idaho and Maine come up quite a bit. You mentioned Maine had one of the largest population increases. So, I mean, that's kind of nice that you're meeting other people that are going through the same thing as you. So it's kind of like there's a familiarity there. Did you find that a lot of those folks were coming from Boston because that's the closest major metropolitan area? Or were they coming from all over?
That was, yeah, my obvious thought, but actually, I think, families from the West Coast, mostly in that sort of Boss-Wash megapolis. So like Washington, D.C., New York City, or kind of, those metro areas, Baltimore, all the way up to Boston. So you would think, 80% of it's going to be Boston, but it wasn't. It felt like a really sort of broad swath mix. But, more heavily weighted towards the East Coast. But just as equally, we've seen, folks from California who, are looking to change things up, have also sort of moved here. But like, I think it created really, it just created an awesome opportunity to, launch a business locally, get involved with the community and really start to kind of put in roots where, where you want to kind of live, work, play, and to have a business that I didn't have to be on Zoom calls every day.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, especially one where you can be outside, and even during pandemic when you launch, there's obviously outdoor work and indoor work.
But I think it creates a really interesting segue just for any type of business, because you've had a lot of people that have relocated and have, several years later started to kind of take root. And, maybe some of the bigger companies that they're working for are kind of calling them back, right? Like the kind of idea of remote work is, still a thing, but definitely, especially in the last 6, 12, 18 months, it's kind of not, it's trending, in the other direction.
I'm definitely seeing that here. People are going back 3-4 days a week instead of once or 0.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so, some people are like, oh, shoot, what does this mean for my family? We've created kind of a great, cool lifestyle for the last year, 2, 3. Well, I think, franchising is a great opportunity to explore.
Absolutely.
It's a way to say, you know what, maybe we are going to stay here permanently.
Yeah. No, let's transition to that, because obviously, we went through our vetting process. You ended up selecting Ace Handyman Services as your franchise brand, which, as I mentioned before, is the sister company, so to speak, of Ace Hardware. So you're able to enjoy that trust, the goodwill, the positive reputation that the neighborhood hardware side of the business had created. So, is that the way it was received when you launched the business? Do you find that there's customers and even your employees that are like, oh yeah, I know Ace. I've always known that brand.
Yeah, I think I would have really struggled with I think Ace has a very unique, nationally recognized brand, but is so closely associated with local. Local is deeply important to me, like Main Street, mom and pop, local businesses, right? My grandfather was a pharmacist and ran a small, number of local pharmacies in Louisville, Kentucky. And, the local neighborhood pharmacy, like you don't see those anymore because,
my little town of Yardley, PA, where I grew up, had that old school pharmacist where it was kind of the meeting place in the center of town on Main Street.
But hardware stores had that same sort of vibe, like the local hardware store, like that goes back generationally. But luckily, the hardware stores were able to band together in what is one of the largest co-ops. A lot of people don't know that. Ace is actually a co-op. So the shareholders of Ace Hardware are actually the nearly 6,000 mom and pop retailers throughout the country. It is, by definition, about as local and Main Street as you can get, but collectively, come together to form this, wonderful national brand that's recognized. So I definitely bought into that. I don't know that, I would have invested in a Dunkin' Donuts franchise or something along those lines.
That's your point. You get
the recognized brand, but doesn't associate with like a local business the same way.
Sure. I mean, you get the benefits of like a local vibe, but you're getting the kind of supplier and purchasing power and kind of training and support that comes along with a brand. So I can see how you kind of enjoy the best of both worlds with this particular situation. So,
So
let's.
I was going to say, just on the customer side of things, obviously very strong brand recognition and trust. And in a landscape where you're used to, chuck in a truck handyman sort of showing up, may or may not. So that was great. I will say, one of my strategies, or call it anti-strategy, was, a lot of these hardware store owners, and I mean, these are generational businesses. There are 36 Ace Hardwares just in Southern Maine.
Wow.
I did not go day one or month one or even year one. I was like, I'm going to keep my head down and learn the business and prove myself. And so I didn't really leverage that as an opportunity year one or really into year two, because I felt it was just so critical to, develop trust and develop reputation, develop a 5-star business before necessarily going into a hardware store and say, hey, can you refer people to me, right? We were definitively focused on shopping locally and going into Ace hardware stores to get materials when we could. So that was, I think, a strategy that was unique to a lot of people in this particular business that I maybe just didn't leverage that much to begin with, but there was a reason why,
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, so your business is interesting because you need to balance, the amount of client acquisition and work that you generate with the amount of people that you have on your staff to kind of fulfill those jobs. And you mentioned before you have a W-2 labor model. So the handymen that work for you are your employees. Tell us a little bit about your team. What is that, what did it look like when you launched, and what does it look like now?
Yeah, I mean, when we launched a business, we, hired a couple people, right out of the gates. I think, day one, I remember like week one before we the launch week, we kind of open up the marketing, open up the phone line, start, taking calls. We had someone from Ace Handyman Services support team that was here with us that week during launch. It was just my wife and I at the time. We were running around like chickens with our heads cut off, trying to, answer phones and book jobs and be helpful, right? And so, I don't know, we started that on a Monday, Tuesday, and had our first job scheduled on Friday. And it was great. We had one craftsperson in particular that was just fantastic. He actually has since gone on to do some other things. And he and I had dinner actually not too long ago, but he was with us for 2 years. And it was really, really critical to have that one core anchor.
Yeah.
We sort of cycled through, a couple people on and off, but by and large was really lucky. Always had good people that turned up, and things along those lines. I will say about just the trade marketplace in general, like people are used to coming on and off jobs, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's something I've had to learn and try to navigate. What I mean by that is I might have people that connect with me. I need work. Because they just came off one project, but they have another project lined up 3 months from now. So they're just looking for something. So it's a little different than what you and I might be used to.
Sure. Like if you hire a full-time employee for like a white-collar office job, you expect them to stay with you for a long period of time, not just for 3 months until they get to their next job.
Yeah, right. Or like, sort of looking at things, right? So, that's been a learning curve, to where we have the team now is really focused on, I think one of the key lessons I learned is we were super successful our first year, mm-hmm. and probably we did about 25%, 30% more than I had planned. Okay. And so I was a little bit ambitious and said, cool, let's like scale the team up going into year two. I built the team up a little bit too much to where it operationally it was a little top heavy. We needed to kind of recalibrate from that because and it spread the team too thin. Like we sort of mm-hmm. lost the family team feel a little bit when you're going from 2, 3, 4 people out in the field to 6, 7, 8. All of a sudden it was a little tough. So this year's real focus is rather than one big operation to service all the markets we have, we're just focused on developing small team operation, a central office manager, 2 or 3 people in the field, really kind of tight unit covering one, particular market area. And I found that having a really great lead anchor person, well-rounded craftsperson is key. We then supplement that with either a full-time, part-time craftsperson or handyman. We have different positions. And then typically one of the things that's very interesting about this business is the opportunity to connect with retired or semi-retired tradespeople who honestly just want to, like, love helping people, want to stay busy, but their idea of going back into the trades means they have to do big jobs that are really hard on their body. But the nature of our business in the handyman lane is we only do small jobs, right? Like we do a deck repair. We're not rebuilding a whole deck or doing an addition. And so I've been able to hire some of those super knowledgeable 40, 50 years under their belt who just want to work, 12, 16 hours a week, want to pass on their knowledge, want to help homeowners. And that's been kind of a cool model.
Yeah, I bet. So I'm sure that, the types of stuff you do really runs the gamut because handyman is a large bucket. I think when you and I met and we looked at the punch list of different things you could do, it was like 100 different things, maybe more. But like, what are the most popular jobs that your craftsmen and handyman do on a frequent basis? Like, what kind of stuff are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, like common jobs. I mean, drywall repair is a common one. So we've developed relationships, for example, with folks that do water mold remediation, and
like restoration companies.
Yeah, and so if someone has a major, huge loss on a home, it might be too big for us. But your common one would be like, there was a leak, and so they had to come in and open up the drywall. Now those companies make holes, but they don't fix them. So that's where we get called in. So that's a common thing, sort of fixing those things. But seasonal punch list, seasonal repair. So we're coming up to spring. So there's like just a whole laundry list of things that every homeowner in this country, but certainly in certain markets, should be looking out for. And you want to, what you want to do. So minor exterior repairs, trim, siding, fascia. Try to get ahead of the rot, before it really becomes too expensive. That's really generally what we do is the smaller repair preservation work that you invest in your home. It's your largest asset. Invest in it, preserve it, protect it, maintain it. It's just offsetting what would then become a much more expensive renovation of repair or it's deferred. And we focus on hundreds of those things and partner with homeowners to kind of help make sure that they're keeping up with it.
So in terms of your experience with repeat business, do you find that it's like a homeowner that gets you in there for some trim and then it turns out they need to relocate a chandelier or something like that? Or is it like, hey, they're just going to call you every spring for that trim, so the repeat is more of a seasonality to it? How does that look in real life?
We're still learning that a little bit, and I'll give you some context. Our overall repeat business number right now, after sort of 24 months or so, is around 30%. We have on one hand, we have sort of repeat business where actually the homeowner just had a major backlog of repairs projects, and they haven't been able to find anyone. Like especially like the last couple of years, they connect with us like you have no idea. I've been trying to find someone to help me with all these little things for 2 years, and they're like over the moon. So a lot of that repeat business is there's a lot of pent up demand. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is, like you said, like they kind of are getting into a bit of a routine. Oh yeah, these are the things that I would do every spring. We've got a wonderful customer in Kennebunkport who, calls us up. She's used our services every spring, calls us up. Yep. Like I want, send me Paul for a full day. We're going to do the list, and we just have all the record there. We put out our patio furniture and fix
Knock
things.
It out.
And then you have the repeat business where they maybe used us one off, two off, and they really don't use professional services that often in their home, but it's 6, 12, 18 months later starting to cycle back around, right?
Gotcha.
So maybe they've had us in to fix a faucet and a light, and then, like 6 months, year goes by. It's like, oh, I have this other thing, and
yeah,
now
I can see that. I mean, it's all about like trust, and obviously it comes down to price and how well you perform your task. Do you show up on time? Do you leave the house clean? Do you clean up after yourself? So once a homeowner builds that trust with you, then they're going to pull out that things to get fixed list and start saying, hey, look, by the way, we have all this other stuff. So I'm glad you're able to enjoy some repeat business in that regard. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was, my impression, and it's not based on any data, is that like the baby boomer generation, you mentioned there's quite a few up in Maine, are kind of like do-it-yourselfers, but then the younger generation, like, guys, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s even, are kind of like the do-it-for-me types. They're like, they want someone else to come in and do it. And I think that's where you come in. Is that a fair assessment based on your experience in New Hampshire and Maine?
I think that's the assessment nationally, right? By the way, that's why, Ace got into this home services side because of that, and obviously had a bunch of, smart people looking at it for a while. I mean, I think that's been the trend for a little while now, right? But yes, that's also kind of been what we've seen up here, although, by and large, Mainers in general are people who move to Maine, right? Like they like to wear flannel and buy a pickup truck and buy tools. So there's a little bit of a challenge where, some certain people from New York are like, oh, I just do it for me. And other people are like, no, I want to try and do this myself. We've actually had quite a bit of fun with a handful of customers, or a lot of people who, especially in the housing market, both nationally and locally, have had to buy things almost like sight unseen or like wave inspections. I mean, this has happened all over the country. Yeah. And so a lot of people, I think, did that and like, don't worry, honey, we'll be able to renovate that bathroom ourselves. And we get a call like 12 months later. Like, so we've tried to do this over the last year, and actually turns out it's a lot harder than we thought. And they might have us in to help out, right? And carry the torch for them.
I got you.
It's fun to work with folks like that.
Yeah. All right. So are you willing to share how your business is performing in terms of the progression? I know you mentioned there were some ups and downs, but what can you share with us in terms of the maybe sales or results that you've seen since you've been an owner?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think our first year was 2022. That was like by and large our first fiscal year, because we launched in October 21, and so our first year we did $750,000, so nearly $750,000 top line.
Wow, that's a lot for your work.
Yeah, it was kind of nuts, because I think there was a lot of other franchises in the Ace network, and I think we might have been certainly in the top 10, maybe like 7 or 8 in terms of. And the CMO of the business was like, you did that in Maine? He like made a comment, it's like, by and large, the entire state of Maine only has 1.2 million people, right? So like there's, neighborhoods of Houston that are bigger. Right. So we did that. We took a step back in year 2, and, finished up around 600,000. And, this year we're hoping to get up to 1 million. With that strategy. And I'm thinking through the lens this year a little bit differently, where, as you pointed out, I did invest in 3 franchise units. I think 2022 into 2023, I was thinking, hey, let's just single operation covering a bigger area. And I think this year I'm more like, let's start to dial it back, where, we can have smaller numbers, but kind of replicate that times 2, times 3.
Yeah. Well, you touched on this before, but I always like to ask, like coming in, on year 3, going back when you started, what would you have done differently? Basically what you've learned now and applying it, those key lessons to launching the business. Would you have done anything differently?
Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, it's the thing that I still think about to this day, and I'm still trying to work on, but our number one need in the business is really to create an extremely strong recruitment network, recruitment engine. I mean, our revenue is directly tied to our ability to have, craftspeople at any given time.
Right.
And so, I think developing that network earlier, but in hindsight, like, I don't think I could have, you kind of have to learn it. But it's really about, I think, networking, right? You can never start that too early, and being humble and asking questions and connecting with other people. I think the other thing that's really important for this business, but any business, is the concept of like, co-opetition, right? Like, especially in the trades where there's such high demand, you actually can find people that on the surface, oh, that's a competitor, but actually you could connect and really cooperate together and pass referrals together and share knowledge and kind of benefit that. So that's been really helpful. I'm a big believer in the BNI network, which is an international framework for business networking. It's in every, community just about. That's been awesome. And been a big help as well in terms of meeting other local business people, especially when I'm sort of new to the area. So
do you feel like, you mentioned before, kind of leveraging the existing framework of all of those Ace hardware stores, do you feel like cultivating relationships with some of those owners and maybe doing some more collaboration with them at this stage when you've kind of proven the chops, you've built a business?
That's totally the strategy this year. Yeah, in hindsight, it was like, geez, maybe I was a little bit too timid on that front, but on the flip side, I'm dealing with Mainers, and I didn't want to come in, like some outsider.
Yeah, I got you.
What have you done for me, today? So I don't know if I'd do anything differently, but I think that's definitely a key part of the strategy.
Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about the franchisors' training and ongoing support, whether it relates to marketing and client acquisition or just operational support. How's that been overall since you've been part of the Ace Handyman system?
So I think the team has always been amazing. Like the culture is really, really strong there. I think the context I would provide is when I invested in this and flew out to Colorado and was spending some time out with the support center. Keep in mind that they were a legacy business that was recently acquired by Ace. So it was actually the business is called Handyman Matters.
Handyman Matters, right?
And, I think there was, that legacy business maybe had 20, 30, 40 people in the support center. And so fast forward a couple of years, I mean, I think they've doubled, if not close to tripled the size of the team, size of the support. So there's a lot of people who are trying to figure out that and, figure out new roles, figure out new functions, figure out how do we do things at scale. And, I think they've added a lot of units in terms of other franchise locations opening up. So it's stretched the support center quite a bit. I've had to figure a lot out on my own. But the ownership network is really, really great. That's another benefit of franchising. I have not found anyone I couldn't call up. And similarly, same thing to me, people on the West Coast, like Washington is about as far from Maine as you can get. So a couple owners out there that I know pretty well, and they could call me up and I would happily spend an hour with them in the evening trying to solve a problem or vice versa. So that's really, really, really great.
I feel that in my business too. I'm in a network. I'm a licensee, not a franchisee, but there's a couple hundred guys like me doing the same thing around the country. And I find that some of the best ideas I come across are through collaboration with my peers. And I always learn something from them. And it makes my business better, makes their business better. And my first year wasn't like that. I thought I could do it on my own. I was on an island. And the more I was open to learning and collaborating, my business has doubled every year, which is a really cool thing. So I totally get that. And that is a nice thing about franchising. You get access to a peer network. And maybe not everything that you learn in Washington State is going to apply to Maine, but some of it might.
Yeah, for sure. So,
well, hey man, you've shared a ton with us today. Anything else you want to add to the mix before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I think we kind of covered off those points. I think we've got, nearly 400 Ace Handyman Services locations now. It might be that. So if whoever's out there listening, if you need some home repairs, look it up online, and it's a good group of people that do care. So,
well, hey man, I really appreciate you joining us today to talk about your experience, and I'm real excited for you, and I'm excited to see where this business goes. So, if anyone listening would like to connect with Ace Handyman Services to see if your territory is available, contact me at franchiseqb.com or on Twitter at QBFranchiseQB. I'll get you connected with them. Thank you so much, Jordan, for taking the time to get in the huddle and speak with us about your experience as an Ace Handyman Services franchise owner.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you having me on.
You got it. Thank you for listening to the Franchise QB podcast, where you're at the helm of your future as a franchise owner. If you enjoyed the content, please rate the show and recommend it to anyone that might be interested in franchising. Make sure to visit franchiseqb.com to subscribe to my newsletter and for an actionable playbook to go from walk-on to legend in your new business. Follow us on Twitter at QBFranchiseQB and join us every week for a new episode. See you next time.
Visit franchiseqb.com to take the next step of your journey towards wealth, independence, and franchise ownership. And remember, when working for the man gets old, you must do something bold. Thank you for listening.